Arizona Territory, late summer dusk. A sky like hammered tin. Heat trembles the horizon as a wall of dust. Haboob rolls like a living thing across a bone-white arroyo. A broken wagon kneels on a split axle. A vulture drops, then lifts, as if measuring the distance to meet. In the wash, quicksand gleams like false water, swallowing a boot-print hole. Ada Rowan, a young settler widow bound at the wrists and 5 months with child, has been cast out by her husband's wealthy kin to die beyond the county line. They accuse her of murder and theft she did not commit. Her water skin is slashed, the trail erased. She has hours before heat or men finish what betrayal began. A lone rider ghosts the ridge, braids and rawhide catching last light. Settlers call him a blood hunter, a feared Chiricahua tracker who follows the scent of spilled iron in sand. He dismounts without a word, draws a knife that flashes like a final verdict. But the rider who appeared at dusk was no savior. This account survives in a sheriff's deposition, where one name was neatly scratched out with 3 hard strokes. Next, you'll see why that single erasure and the torn page that followed changed every oath sworn in this valley. Heat made the land hiss. The sky over the Arizona Territory looked like hammered tin, a dull metal sheet pressed low and ready to split. Wind shouldered in from the south and gathered sand into a wall, a rolling beast with a mouth full of grit. In a bone-white arroyo, a broken wagon knelt on a split axle, like an animal shot through and trying to prey. A vulture tipped out of the high air, dropped as if to test the distance to meet, and lifted again in a ragged circle. Quicksand showed itself as false mercy, a thin skin that shivered with light, that swallowed a boot print without sound, and left no proof a person had ever stood there. Ada Rowan stood with her wrists bound, and rope burns flowering up her arms in angry bracelets. She was 5 months along, belly high under a dust-dulled calico dress. The water skin at her hip had been sliced clean and dry, all damp already stolen by heat and wind. She had been pushed off the back of a freight wagon and told to keep walking until the county forgot her name. "We won't see you again," Ephraim Calder had said through a tender smile that stayed pretty at the edges and dead at the center. "No one will say we lacked charity." His men laughed as the team turned, as the wagon's wheel rolled a slow arc in the sand and drifted away. Ada watched the track behind it vanish a finger at a time under the breath of the desert. She could not even tell herself which direction the town lay, or how close the men had taken her to the line of jurisdiction they used like a broom. Her throat hurt. She thought of water, and it made her tongue swell. A vulture's shadow crossed her face and seemed to stitch her skin shut. She stood, then knelt, then stood again, because kneeling felt like the same as giving up. She was not ready to be quiet. She was not ready to be clean bones. A gust blew grit into her hair and reminded her hair still reached her shoulders, that she still carried a cracked wedding band on a string, even if it no longer fit her swollen fingers. She pinched that ring through the dress and tried not to think of the day she had taken it off, or of the exact second she had torn a ribbon-marked page from Ephraim's ledger and hidden it against her skin. Numbers told the truth, and sometimes the truth could draw blood. Hoofbeats came thin and far at first. The sound threaded itself through the rumble of the oncoming dust wall, until Ada could not tell if she heard rescue or pursuit, or only the desert talking to itself. She turned toward the ridge and saw a rider slide along it like a hawk's shadow. The horse stepped sure and light, picking clean paths between rocks. The rider wore his hair braided and tied with rawhide. A coil of something hung at his belt, bone-handled, notched from use. He did not hurry. He did not call out. He watched the ground as if it were a book open to his private line. When he reached the wash, he dismounted without sound and crouched to study the slashed water skin. The rope fibers clotted to Ada's wrists, the way the sand lay disturbed where men had dragged her. He drew a knife. The blade caught the last of the sun and answered like a bell. Ada did not beg. Her throat had no room for it. He raised the knife and cut the rope between her wrists in one small, exact motion. The frayed ends fell soft as grass. He pressed a coal from a leather ember pouch into a twist of mesquite bark and coaxed a little fire up out of breath and patience. He looked at her once and used one word, like the handle to a door: shelter. She stumbled after him because night rolled down like a shutter, and the dust wall ate the world behind them. He led her under a basalt overhang, where heat leaked out of the rock in slow waves, where sand could not find them, except as a thin whisper. He set a hand to her shoulder and set her to the ground, then pulled his horse's nose into the shelter, and made the animal stand calm, with a touch and two same words in a low voice. The sound, like cedar smoke, made human. The fire was small and stingy, no larger than a hat crown. Still, its light made a line between death and not yet. Ada pressed both palms to the ground to steady herself against the howl in the air. She heard laughter out there, slick laughter that knew her name and the weight of it. Men rode slow circles along the ridge and called Addie like it was a pet and not a person. The rider beside her tested the wind with the flat of his hand and said nothing. He passed her something wet. It was a strip of cactus cut clean and held like a cup. Clear drops gathered at its edge. She put the edge to her lip with shaking hands and let the water walk into her a little at a time, so her throat would not seize. He touched her wrists and bound them again, this time with soft cloth to hide the burn, the way a healer might cover a wound to keep it clean. She flinched until she understood the softness, and then she cried a few tears she had not known she could spare. He let her cry and minded the ember pouch, feeding the small fire with cedar and the smallest of breaths. He smelled of smoke and horse, and a resin note that stayed even after the smoke thinned. He tipped his chin toward the mouth of the overhang and waited. A shape slipped into view. Another rider, hat brim low, the kind of hat men wore when they meant to do business they would not write down. The men did not try to enter. The wind had teeth, and even ugly courage seeks easy doors. One voice called out down the wash, "You hear me, Addie? We'll fetch you tomorrow, polite." Another voice answered with laughter. Neither voice sounded like it believed in tomorrow. The wind made the next words flakes of bone, and Ada could not catch them. A small night passed inside the larger one. The dust hissed on the stone above like rain that could not commit. Ada slept with her head against the basalt and a hand flat on her belly, and woke when the man beside her cut a piece of jerky thin as a vein and set it on a stone to warm and soften for her. He did not eat. He already looked like a person who carried his own hunger in a place it could not trouble him. When she had enough to stand, he set her to her feet with care, like she was a rope he did not want to snap. She said, "I am Ada," and her voice surprised her with how it worked. He did not give his name until she had said hers twice, first to him and then to the horse, with a laugh that made her sound younger than she felt. Then he said, "Gosen," and touched his sternum once, as if introducing not only his body, but the purpose that sat inside it. She said, "They call you Blood Hunter." He studied her face long enough to flatten the breath in her chest, then shook his head once. "Fear's mouth is lazy," he said. His English came out in clean pieces, with the quiet weight of someone who uses each piece with care. "I follow the sign left by iron in sand. I find the place where harm began. I send it back where it belongs. That is a guardian's work. The name they use is a name they made for their own sleeping." She held the edge of the overhang and watched the world turn from slate to soft pewter. The wall of dust eased north, hungry for another county. Silence came back after it in layers, full of old sounds, beetles, and the small talk of lizards, and a hawk's far slice through air. When she tried to step out, her ankles sang with pain. Gosen tore a strip from a cloth and knotted a sling to take the pull from tendon and bone. He worked like a man who had done such work before. He tested the sling with his palm, then nodded once. Satisfied, she asked for a knife. He handed her one and watched her cut the string that held the ring at her neck. She left the ring on the basalt ledge and told herself she could always come back to it if she wanted to wear hope again. The gold looked small and mean in the new light. She slid the ribbon-marked ledger page from the seam of her dress, where she had hidden it against her ribs, and almost laughed when the paper stuck to her with sweat. She held it to the fire's smoke to dry and saw the numbers again, Calder tallies, that did not add. A sale of cattle, with no brand listed, a tithe to the parish that exceeded any mercy she had ever seen Ephraim show with his hands. Ink thickened in one place, where a figure had been written fast. A smear dark as dried blood marked the margin. She had seen Ephraim's gold signet press against that exact corner as he had leaned over the desk, telling her why her home had to be sold, why her presence in that house made honest men blush. Gossain's eyes flicked from paper to her face and back. A paper with men's numbers, he said, not without respect. I have seen such paper shift a river of supplies from one side of the valley to the other. He took a piece of charcoal from the edge of the fire and made a mark in the sand, then another and another. These are tracks, he said, and the shape they make tells you the animal's hunger. Paper tracks speak too. He pointed and Ada saw it fresh, the false sum, the missing brand, the pious gift that bent like a river around a rock and fed the wrong route. They began to move toward water, the way he knew to read it. Watch where birds flew level, watch where beetles crossed, watch where the green left behind by a flood did not give up even after the river walked away. He pulled a knife thin as a thought and trimmed ocotillo spines down to cups. He cut a prickly pear pad and turned it into a single green canteen. He found a clay pocket in the arroyo wall and shoved one end of a pale reed into it until wet darkened the reed, and Ada could drink through it like a straw without moving an inch. A person could live a day on such tricks, and then another. He said, first you learn not to die. Then you learn to look back at those who sent death and make them look at you. Ada asked him why he had cut her free. He considered the question like he might consider the best route over loose rock. Winter work, he said. There is a person whose duty is to bring home those whom the cold would keep. It is not winter now, but I carry that duty even when the sun lies. You were cast out. You are not a deer with a broken leg. You are a person with a fire that still stands. I do not kill persons with such fires. He turned the ember pouch in his hands and added, you make your own winter in your heart when you bind another who has done no harm. They moved. The day grew. Ada walked with short steps because her ankles groaned and because her belly asked her to respect it. Gossain let her set the pace, without show and without complaint. When she faltered, he handed her a sliver of mesquite bark with a smear of sap and said, chew. The mouth remembers water. When she asked if he would take her toward town, he said, if you walk alone toward your town, men who lied will drive you back into quiet ground. To clear a lie made by a town, you carry the lie into a place the town cannot swallow. Sometimes that place is the town's own rooms. Sometimes that place is the earth in front of everyone. He tipped his face toward a far line of cottonwoods. There is a way to do this. It begins with breath. Night came again, soft and full of insect thread. Ada dreamed of bells tolling not for the dead, but for promises, and woke with a start and her hand over her belly, as if to shield the child from sound. Gossain already watched the light, his back to the overhang's mouth, his knife out. He held it level against the air, as if the air itself could be measured for weight. The smallest nod moved his chin. The horse snorted once, like a man amused to be told a joke he had heard too many times. Then Ada saw what the knife had already told him. 3 riders on the ridge, then 5. Men with coats that did not fit their farm hands, and hats that tried too hard. Laughers from the night before, fat now with confidence brought by daylight. They did not come down. They stood edge-on along the ridge and watched the overhang with patient eyes, like men ready to wait for hunger to do their work. Gossain said, we move under the stone until they tire. Then we move like a shadow to the next stone, then the next. Ada nodded. It felt simple enough to be possible. She did not tell him about the scratch of fear in her thigh muscles, that made every step feel like a mistake she did not want to make. He would already know. He had read her breath when he cut her free. He had read her hunger when he gave her the cactus cup. He would read this too, and not look at it any longer than necessary. A cutaway flickered into the story, as if the land itself wished to speak of what happened elsewhere at the same time. In town, Dr. Mercy Hollis sat alone in her small room behind the undertaker's work table. She wrote with a small, precise hand in a ledger that smelled of lamp oil and the faint sweet of the wax that covered the faces of the dead when a family could not bear to see what violence had done. The day's entries had begun with a stillbirth, had moved to a man who had fallen from a roof, and now paused at a third line where her pen did not yet know what to write. She had been called at midnight to the Calder Ranch. She had seen a missing page in a cattle ledger and had watched Ephraim Calder smile in a way that left a wide field of things unsaid. She had watched him set his gold signet down on a corner of paper without seeing the ink smear in the shape of a crescent moon he left there. She wrote only a mark now, a small arrow set in the margin, her own private code for "This is not finished." Then she turned the page and wrote the word wax and the number 3. Her hand did not tremble. Her jaw did. Deputy Silas Boone walked the edge of the wash that same hour with a chewed matchstick stuck to one corner of his mouth, like a drunk man's idea of a mustache. He knelt where the sand lay heavy and saw thin grooves cut like fingernails into it, drag marks, a woman's boot scuff, a cuff button that had come loose and rolled to a stop against a tiny stone. He picked the button up and turned it in his fingers until the light found the pressed C at its center. He felt the letter press into his skin and leave a ghost print there. He did not put the button in the official pouch. He slipped it into his pocket and wrote it down in a small notebook almost as old as his badge, a notebook he had never shown to a captain. He did not yet call it evidence. He called it a thing he wanted to remember. Back in the overhang, Gosen let the fire die to a handful of coals, and then covered even those with thin sand to hide their speech. The morning heat set its hooks early. Ada stood and felt her ankles hold her like old friends. She tasted metal and realized it was fear and the memory of blood in her mouth, a memory from a day when a man she loved had coughed, and the cough had been full of red. She had not been able to save him, but she had been able to count the days he lived, and she had been able to count the debts he left, and now the counting had brought her here. She took one step, and then another, and the steps made a thin song in her head, like a bow on the smallest string. They moved under stone and brush, in a path that felt like threading a needle. Gosen would nod, and Ada would stop. Then he would nod again, and she would step over a patch of sand that looked exactly like any other, until he showed her the dead place at its center, where the skin would not hold weight. He found a clay lip and showed her how to press the side of her hand into it to make a cup that would hold. He cut a long strip of Palo Verde bark and twisted it into a cord and tied it to the ribbon of her ledger page so she could hang it around her neck, under her dress, where sweat might wet it, but no hand would snatch it without warning her. They stopped once at a shallow pool, where a small frog sat like a coin and did not move even when Gosen set his hand beside it. "This one is a map," he said, and smiled in a way that made his eyes look like the place where smoke loves to stay. He turned his palm and let Ada see the tiny wet. The frog had left. "Water remembers every person who listens to it," Ada said. "Mercy Hollis will help me." Her voice carried no question because it could not afford one. "She keeps 2 kinds of books," Ada added, more to herself than to the man beside her. "One for paper, one for sleep." He nodded as if he understood a person might need separate ledgers to survive. Wind shifted. It brought voices that were not the wind's. Then a bird call that did not sound native to this ridge. Gosen's head turned a fraction. He lifted one hand and drew a line through the air that meant down in any language that wanted to live. Ada went down. He went still. A shadow moved at the lip of the wash, a human shape, fast and lean. The shape flicked its hand like a hawk's tail in wind, And then a teenager with a face all edges and eyes, all questions, scrambled down into view. The hawk feather in his hair lay along his head, as if intelligence could be worn like a blade. He looked at Ada first with scorn, then at Gossan with a wordless pressure that said, "Family," before any sound did. He said, "Nietzsche," and then he spoke a stream that Ada could not follow, until he turned to her and set the English in front of her like a cup. Posse rides with soldiers, Calder money at their pockets, iron star at their mouths. They come for your breath and for his knife. The white captain wants a clean page, the other wants a grave that looks like luck. Gossan asked how close. Nietzsche held up a hand with the fingers splayed and then folded two of them with a snap. 3 hills, he said, maybe less if the wind helps them. They talk loud, so the wind likes them. He flicked a small rock off the wall with the tip of a boot and watched it drop to a stop. They do not know the wash eats boots. They will learn. Ada felt her lips move and realized a prayer had found its way out of her without asking her first. She pressed a hand to her belly again and tried to ask the child to be quiet, not so the child would not be born, but so the child would not try to be born now, when running asked for both legs and both lungs. She breathed slow, the way a midwife had taught her to teach other women. She thought of Mercy's steady hands. She thought of Silas Boone's notebook she had never seen, but somehow believed in. She thought of Reverend Pike's ink-blotted quill, and the way the man's sermons always spoke more loudly about fear than about hope. Gossan stood and lifted a curl of cedar to his nose, then tucked it into the ember pouch, as if banked fire could be worn, like a promise. He looked at Ada, and then at Nietzsche, and then at the ridge. "We will not give them a straight line," he said. "We will give them stories to follow, until they fall asleep on their horses." Ada whispered, "I can walk." The truth was, she could, but every step still cost more than she had in her pocket. She knew something now she hadn't known the day before, that Gossan would not pity her, even as he made a path slower than his own body wanted. Pity had the shape of a cage. What he gave her had the shape of a door. He set his hand at her elbow once, just enough to remind her the ground sloped where a person's eyes might insist it was even. Nietzsche moved ahead of them, flitting like a bird that laughed at its wings, leaving marks where he wanted the posse to look and erasing others where he wanted them to miss their own guesses. They reached a stand of cottonwoods and tucked in behind their long skirts of leaves. The air there held a damp cool Ada could have married. She took in one breath, and then another, as if each were a debt paid. Gossan broke a dead twig into equal lengths and set them in the sand, then moved them one by one to draw a plan any child could read. The posse here, the wash here, the place where hoof would sink just enough to steal a man's footing and make him look elsewhere. He marked a small circle and tapped it twice. "Bell," he said. Ada did not understand until the sound came from far off. The undertaker's bell, one long, two short Mercy's signal that the dead were being hurried or miscounted. The sound ran along the valley like water poured on a hot skillet. Heads would turn, fingers would point. The town would pretend to busy itself and then listen harder. The bell did not tell you who died. It told you honesty had raised its hand. Ada said, "They'll lock me in the vestry. They'll call it care. They'll count me like a jar in a pantry." Gossan gave a single sound that might once have been a laugh and might once have been a cough. "Then we carry the vestry into the open," he said. "We do not let their walls keep their ink safe." They moved again. Ada's shoes were already cutting her toes, but pride told pain to stand at the back of the line. They skirted a dry waterfall where smooth rock remembered water, like a scar remembers a blade. Gossan ran his fingers over the stone, and Ada wondered if the stone understood it was being praised. They crossed a patch of sand that looked solid but gave under the pressure of a foot, like a lie that had been told too often. Nietzsche strewed a little trail of dried grass from his pocket in one direction, and then tossed a handful into another, making the wind a co-conspirator. Somewhere behind them, men cursed the way men curse when the land does not answer to money. Ada walked and counted. 20 steps, and then a short rest, 20 again, and another. A story came to her the way stories come when bodies are busy with their own work. She saw the marriage register in Reverend Pike's careful script, her name written clear, and the witness lines filled by hand that wasn't the hand of either witness who actually stood there. She saw a second hand ride over the first, thinning it with a razor and laying fresh names like planks over a hole. She saw the quill blot once in a way the parson's sermons never did. She saw the vestry box's small lock and the larger lock on the parson's heart. The one Debt had hung there years ago. She felt anger, like a small hard thing in her pocket, lighter than grief and more useful for walking. Gosen said, "When they look at me, they will try to make me hold all the fear they have let loose in this valley. Do not let their eyes put that in your hands too." She said she would not. He nodded. "We will show them what belongs to them and what belongs to you. They will try to make you ashamed of breath they do not own. Do not give it to them." She thought of the oath he had not spoken but had already started keeping. She felt the shape of it in every small gift, the ember, the bark cup, the sling. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too thin. She said, "I see you." He looked at her and the look felt like a hand steadying the world. Behind them a rider hollered. The sound skittered over rock and came back with a new edge. Nietzsche turned his head quick and showed his teeth like a fox, surprised to find laughter inside its own mouth. "They found the wash," he said. "They make their horses heavy with fear." He pointed to a small rise. "We stand there for a breath, then we drop and they ride past. Then the ground learns their names." Ada's lungs burned in a way that made sense to her. The baby turned once in her and then rested again, as if even unborn people understand when hiding must come before hunger. She crested the rise with Gosen at her left shoulder, and Nietzsche already gone like a word swallowed mid-sentence. From that small height, she saw the dust of the posse like a second weather, and in that dust, the glint of brass and the shape of a saber, and behind both the line of a face she knew too well. Ephraim Calder, with his hat set just so, and his mouth already forming a future where he would be called Savior for returning his troublesome sister-in-law to care. Next to him, Captain Merritt Harlow sat straight as a drilled fence post, his jaw working on a thought he would later say out loud in smooth words, polished on the way up his throat. Ada could not hear the words yet. She could see them fit in his mouth. Order, calm, protect. She ducked below the rise with Gosen, and the land gathered them in, like a breath taken and held. The posse rode past and their noise dripped off the rock. The ground shook once, a small reminder that the land lets you borrow it, but never sells. Ada pressed a hand to the dirt and felt a kind of answer come up through her palm, a low, old hum, the color of cedar smoke. She did not think she imagined it. She thought a place keeps score. They slid along the base of the rise until it let them out, near a stand of rabbit brush and the gray ribs of a dead saguaro. Gosen stopped long enough to turn and look back, and his eyes narrowed, then softened. "They ride with soldiers," he said, as if he needed to hear the words out loud to respect them. "They think uniforms make their lies clean." He shifted the ember pouch at his belt like a man might shift a child from one hip to the other. He set his knife low. He did not say ready. He did not say run. He said, "We live." Ada's breath evened. The world refused to grow larger, but it did stop trying to crush her for a second. She reached up and touched the cord at her neck and knew the ledger page hung there, like a flat heart, against her skin. She told the page, silently. It would do the thing it had been born to do. Then she let Gosen move, and she moved with him, and the child inside her shifted once like a hand, trusting the hand that carried it. The day stretched thin as a window's last light. It made edges sharp enough to cut. Ada and Gosen and the boy moved along a seam where shadow met sun and stepped into a line of cottonwoods that held the wash like a secret. The leaves rattled a language the wind loved. Gosen lifted his chin and breathed deep once, then turned his head toward a low knuckle of rock. Ada saw nothing, and then she saw the smallest curl of smoke lift and disappear, as if ashamed to be caught. Her heart climbed into her mouth, Before she understood, the smoke belonged to a signal, not to a fire trying to eat the valley. Nietzsche smiled without any softness this time. "Kin," he said, and his voice put steel under the single syllable. "Kin who watch for hunters who hunt the wrong meat." Ada's legs shook with relief and fear, in equal measure. She looked back through the trees and saw the dust line thicken. She heard men tangle their own voices with orders they would later pretend had come from elsewhere. She thought of Mercy's ledger and of one line that would bloom in it today, a line no one in town would know how to read until it was too late to sell silence. The undertaker's bell lifted again, one long, two short. Birds rose from roofs like a hand's hair, standing in cold. A small shape detached itself from the low rock and became a person, with eyes full of quick math. Nietzsche breathed 2 words into the person's ear, and the person's mouth set. The world seemed to take a breath and hold it in its fist. Ada felt that hand press all the way to her lungs. At dawn, with a coyote's bark still shaking its tail against the sky, Nietzsche spoke one more sentence, not loud and not afraid. "A Calder posse and a cavalry patrol ride together," he said, each word like a coin, set down surely. "They are coming toward this wash." They moved as the wind moved, not in a line, but in a drift. Cutting corners the posse would not know to cut. The cottonwoods gave them one more minute of shade, then peeled back like a curtain and let the valley burn in from the edges. Gossain put 2 fingers to the ground, tasted dust without letting it touch his tongue, and shifted their path, a hair's breadth, toward a low spine of rock where the sand set like old clay. Ada felt the shift in her hips and knees, and knew he was sparing her ankles, even while he spared their lives. Nietzsche ranged ahead and behind at once, a trick of youth and hunger that made him seem 2 boys instead of 1. When he whistled once, the sound slid along the wash and hid inside the leaves. When he whistled twice, nothing moved except the hawk feather at his temple. The second whistle meant close danger. Ada learned it in her muscles before she learned it in her head. The first horse showed itself as a shadow that could not choose a shape. It stumbled at the wash lip and checked with a snort. The man on its back cursed and pretended he had meant to stop. The second horse kept coming and slid, knees folding, sending a cone of sand down into the shallow belly of the quick mud. Gossain did not smile. He did not like the land to hurt animals for the foolishness of men. He made a quiet sound in his throat that was not pity and not scorn. He touched Ada's elbow to say, "Keep close." She kept close and put a palm to her belly as the child rolled once, a slow turn that felt like a scent. Voices carried. Ephraim's voice led like a glossy ribbon pulled through a needle's eye. "Steady, boys," he called, and it sounded like he was talking to good dogs, not to men who wore spurs and ate meat with knives. Captain Harlow's voice followed, clipped and flat. "Hold your lines. No unnecessary discharge. We are here to restore calm." The men made the kind of sound men make when told to be calm by someone who does not have to reload under fire. The wash muttered back. The rabbit brush shook as if full of laughter. Nietzsche slung 3 stones in the time it takes a man to suck in a lie, and sent them to kiss 3 different places on the far bank. The posse turned their heads as one. In that moment of looking the wrong way, Gossain slid like a shadow across open ground, and Ada slid with him, a body learning from another body, without words. They reached the basalt overhang they had left at dawn, and saw it had changed while they were away. Someone had brushed its floor, smooth with a branch. Someone had set 3 sticks in a row pointing west. Someone had tucked a sprig of dried sage into a crack. Kin had come, seen, left marks a watcher could read. Gossain touched the sage to his forehead, and then set it into the ember pouch with respect that looked like tenderness. They made the next dash, and then the next. Each one took a year and a half, and at the end of each year, Ada would find her breath again, with a small surprised sound, like a child giving back a stolen toy. The men on the ridge thinned and thickened, and then, bored by their own bravado, started to cut down toward easier ground. The cavalry stayed high to watch the watcher. Ada kept her eyes on the ground, because the sky could make promises the ground might not keep. They reached a shallow cut that led into town, like a private hallway. Gosan raised his hand to stop them, and used the other to draw a line in the dirt with the edge of his knife. Here, he said, to cross is to let them put words in your mouth, but you want to carry your own words in. We choose how. Ada looked at the line and knew it had no legal power, and more power than any paper, if she blessed it. She lifted her chin and stepped over. Gosan followed without hesitation. Nietzsche threw his feathered head forward like a horse tossed a bit, and stepped across with a small huff, as if daring the line to bite him. It did not. The town showed itself, the way small towns do when they feel threatened. Windows with eyes behind them, doors that stayed mostly closed, but not all the way. A street that had remembered how to be quiet in case sound brought trouble. The undertaker's bell had stopped, but the quiet it left kept ringing. Dr. Mercy Hollis stood in a doorway that belonged to no one, a dark dress cut for utility, and a mouth that liked to tell the truth until it remembered what truth can cost. She lifted her chin at Ada. Ada lifted hers back. In 2 steps, Mercy reached her, took in the bruised rope burns, and the dust where it clung, and the gate carefully built to keep a child from hurting, and asked without asking, "You're walking because you want to, not because someone made you?" Ada said, "I'm walking because I'm not done." Mercy's eyes softened and hardened at once. "Then come," she said. "We pretend today long enough to lay out the tools." They passed under the undertaker's sign where a painted hand pointed gently downward, as if to indicate heaven lived below ground. The back room smelled of soap, lye, and a thin, sweet wax that clung to every edge. 3 shapes on 3 tables lay under cloths that tried to be kind. Mercy did not lift them yet. She touched the corner of one cloth with a gloved finger and said, "Their tags are wrong. The dates speak a stutter. The handbills call them something else." She did not look at Gosan when she spoke, but it was as if she spoke to him anyway, to the part of him that tracked errors the way other men tracked quail. Silas Boone arrived on the end of his own uncertainty, like a man dragged behind a joke he did not laugh at. He took his hat off, and then put it back on, and then took it off again, to get to the small notebook he kept under the crown. He flipped to a page that had not been meant for anyone else's eyes. The cuff button lived in the lamp's light, like a little moon with a letter stamped in it. He set it down, and did not have to say the C. Everyone's eyes said it before air did. He said, "You're safe here," and then flinched, as if the word safe had bit him. "For the moment," he added. Mercy spared him a glance that said this was the first true thing he had said all day. Gosan stood as if carved from the room's shadow. He watched hands, not faces. He watched the way the undertaker's ledger wanted its pages turned. He watched the swell of Ada's breath, and the way her hand went to her lower back and stayed there. He moved 2 inches and took a weight from a shelf and slid it to her without speaking. She set it against her spine, and the relief made her close her eyes for one long blink that looked like prayer. Reverend Josiah Pike came in like a cold draft. He kept one hand tucked into his coat, as if holding an animal there that might escape. He nodded too many times in the space of one doorframe. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, and the title tried to hide the void behind it. "We've all been worried." Mercy did not let her mouth joke. She said, "We?" in a tone dry enough to curl paper. He looked at the floor. "My parish has debts," he said, as if that explained the weather. "The register." He stopped himself. The word register hung there like a rope with nothing tied to it. Ada faced him full. She knew what he carried now, the weight of a name scoured thin and written over, the ache in his wrist after he had pressed too hard, trying to make the new name look old. "I want to see the book," she said, "the one with the truth under it." He pressed his lips together as if water might leak out. "In the vestry," he said finally, "but Captain Harlow has asked me to keep certain things. Order asks for patience." Mercy said, "Order keeps finding this room by mistake." She lifted the first sheet without flourish. The face under it had been made soft by wax. The tag at the toe said one date. Mercy's notebook said another. The small hole over the left breast did not ask permission to speak. It spoke. Ada's hand found the table's edge. The child turned again in her, slow and thoughtful, an old soul rolling over to look at light. Silas cleared his throat. "If we're going to the church," he said, "we should go now while their coffee is burning." He meant the soldiers. He meant the men who would lock a door and then say it was for her own good. Mercy covered the faces again, with the kind of care that makes it easier to look away later. She pulled off her gloves and put them on again, with a snap that sounded like a period. "Go by the alley," she said. "I will walk the long way and break the air with the bell if anyone tries to close a door on the wrong side of us." They stepped out into a street that had learned a new language overnight. Eyes spoke it, hands doffed hats with it. Even dogs moved with a stiff-legged eloquence that said they understood who held meat and who held rope. Gosan walked at Ada's right, Nietzsche at her left. Silas stayed a step forward and a fraction to the side. The old trick of men who have been told to take bullets, meant for other men, without being told why. The church looked like a ship that had fallen out of the sky and decided to pretend it had grown there. Its bell rope hung with a twist of sweat salt, drying along it like lace. Reverend Pike's keys shook as he tried to fit the right one into the vestry lock. Ada's hand came up and steadied his wrist without thinking. He breathed out once like a man surfacing. The lock turned. The vestry smelled of ink, old linen, old flowers that had meant well and failed. The register sat on the desk like a witness who did not know whether to put one hand on the Bible. Pike opened to the page he had been thinking about since dawn. The line with Ada's marriage had been worked thin and then dressed again like a wound that refused to heal. The new witness names had a curve in them that did not match the rest of the book. Ink glistened where no ink should still glisten. Ada put the ledger page from her neck beside the register, and the two looked like relatives who did not speak the same language but shared a jawline. Gosan leaned over and breathed gently on the page, then looked at the sheen and the way the dried ink did not take his breath like a thirsty thing. He touched the feather end of the quill left in the stand and felt how stiff it was with old dye. He said, "This is a wall built yesterday that pretends to be 10 years old." Pike closed his eyes and spoke to the floor. "I did it," he said. "I did what was asked, because I owed, and because a man said he would forgive the debt, and because my hands wanted to be lighter. They are not lighter." He opened his eyes again. The eyes were wet and not trying to hide it. "I will write what should have been written." Silas had not put his hat back on. He held it under his arm like a shield that would not stop bullets, but might slow a thought. He said, "Captain Harlow won't like this." The door behind him moved an inch, as if to answer. Harlow himself filled it without sound, a habit people learn when they become the kind of person others look at first. 2 soldiers bracketed him. Ephraim slid in at the edge like oil, finding the seam between wood and barrel. "There you are," Ephraim said, voice of concern, eyes of accounting. "We've been ever so worried. Reverend, thank you for minding Mrs. Rowan while we sorted out the ugly rumors." Ada could smell the saddle soap on his coat and the lie under it. Harlow's mouth tightened. "Protective custody," he said, choosing the words like they were bullets, and he had only a few. "For your safety, ma'am, and for the peace of the town." Gosan did not step back or forward. He seemed to leave his body standing and send his attention out like a hunting bird. Nietzsche's fingers found the strap of his sling without moving to it. Silas's jaw worked one slow chew at a time. Reverend Pike pressed a finger to the line on the register and left a small print there that would be there tomorrow and next year, and always, if the book survived, the next quarter hour. Mercy's bell sounded on the other side of the wall, one long, 2 short. The sound came through the wood like a heartbeat. Ephraim pulled a paper from his coat with a flourish that did not forget its audience. Ada saw the edge of her stolen ledger page, riding there, like a poor cousin, behind a rich man's carriage. "Captain," Ephraim said, "you'll want to see this memorandum. It clarifies how best to proceed for the general good. Mrs. Rowan is unwell. Grief makes people do rash things. We want to spare her the shame of public scenes." He said shame like it was a clean cloth. He would happily lay over any face that made him uncomfortable. Harlow took the memorandum, as if it might bite him. He studied the lines and found his own signature at the bottom, like a snake eating its tail. Whatever hope had ridden in his eyes put its head down. "Lock the doors," he said, not unkindly, not loudly. The soldiers moved with machine grace. The click of the bolt sliding into place sounded like a key turning in a floodgate. Ada's chest went small and tight, but not with panic, with calculation. She thought of the undertaker's bell. She thought of town ears straining under hats. She thought of Mercy's feet counting the steps between the bell rope and this door. She thought of Silas's little book and the cuff button with a C, of Nietzsche's 2-word reports, of Gossen's ember pouch with its banked fire. She said to Harlow, in a voice as simple as a nail, "Protective custody is a phrase men use when they are afraid of a woman speaking in the same room as their paperwork." The captain flinched as if someone had slid a letter opener under the skin of his truth. Ephraim's smile brightened. "She's overwrought," he told the room, including Ada, in a gesture that tried to look fatherly. "Dr. Hollis will agree. We need to get her to a quiet place." He looked around for Mercy and did not find her, because she was on the far side of the wall ringing the code again with both hands, and her jaw set. Gossen breathed, slow and even. His eyes moved once around the room and counted, and Ada felt counted in a way that did not reduce her. He reached for the ember pouch and then stopped, knowing fire in here would bless the wrong gods. Nietzsche eased back a half step, so the bench behind him would be where he wanted it, when something heavy needed to meet it. Silas lifted his pocket Bible an inch, and then set it down on the register, as if to say 2 books could agree for once. Harlow tried one more word. "Peace," he said. It was what he knew to ask. It was the only coin he carried that made him feel rich. The door behind him filled again with men, this time not soldiers. Hats first, then faces, then hands. The town had come like water through hairline cracks. "You don't lock a church against its own," someone said. "You don't put a woman in a box," someone else added. Harlow looked at the men and saw his report turning to ash. He did not like the taste of that ash. He lifted a hand to press the air down. "For everyone's safety," he repeated. Lighter now, feeling it escape him. The undertaker's bell changed its speech. One long, 2 short, then again. Then a pause long enough to draw breath. Then once, twice, 3 times in a row. Mercy was speaking a code only a handful knew. Foul play. Evidence at risk. Witnesses needed now. The words rode the iron of the bell and arrived hot. Ephraim took a half step toward Ada, expecting the step to carry her with it, expecting the gravity of his will to pull her. The step did not carry her. She had learned overnight how to root her feet as trees do, through the soles and into the shelf of earth under the floorboards. "Don't," she said. One word, small and flat as a coin, heavy as a law. He stopped because something in the room turned its face toward him, and it was not Gossen, and it was not the captain, and it was not the reverend. It was the page in the register, with the thin skin and the wet ink. It was the undertaker's tags under the cloth in the back room. It was the cuff button in Silas's pocket, leaving its ghost print on his hand. It was the boy with the hawk feather, who did not blink when men shouted. It was a ledger page hung on a string against a beating heart, and it was the beating itself. The first shot rang outside, not to kill, only to make men jump and call it fear of Indians later. The second shot hit wood. The undertaker's shed took it in and gave back a sigh as dry as a Bible, left open in a barn. Fire ran with the sound, quick and stupid, hungry for anything that would make it feel like it had a reason. Mercy stopped ringing and ran. The smell of smoke found the church's nose. Harlow swore under his breath and forgot not to. Silas threw his hat at the nearest soldier, because a hat thrown at the right second is better than a bullet fired a second too late. The soldier's hand went up to catch it and found empty air, and in that small space, Gossen moved. He was not where he had been. He was at the door, and the bolt was not where it had been either. Nietzsche's bench met a shin, and the room turned to a tangle. The door gave, then stuck, then gave again, under the weight of men who wanted out and men who wanted in, and people who did not know which they wanted. Ada stayed where she was, and lifted the ledger page in one hand and pointed to the register with the other, and said, in a voice that knew how to deliver a child in a cramped room with a flood coming, "Look, it is a power to make a room look where you want it to look." Men who would never have looked at a woman's hand unless it carried a plate looked. They saw the thinness of the scraped line. They saw the new names shine. They saw the Reverend's finger mark, like a bruise that meant, "I did this." They saw the ledger pages smear, where a signet had pressed blood, or ink, or both. They saw, and in seeing, shifted their weight. The room's floor noticed. Old wood knows where men stand. It creaked as if in sympathy. Fire took the undertaker's shed wall and made a sound like a sleepwalker laughing. Mercy shouted something, and the words came through the church door, like a packet tossed over a fence. "Tags," she called. "They're burning them." Gosen moved through the doorway into smoke. He went low and did not cough, because you do not cough until you are safe. Nietzsche slipped under a soldier's arm and vanished into smell. Silas put his shoulder to the door, not to hold it shut now, but to hold it open for people who knew which way this story needed to go. Ephraim swore then, out loud and ugly, the way a man swears when the paper he thought would bless him starts telling the wrong truth. He lunged. Ada did not step back. She had learned another new thing. If you stop walking at the right time, the person who lunges meets air where a body should be, and the surprise steals his balance. He caught the edge of the vestry table and knocked the ink bottle over. Black water ran toward the register line like a river, returning to a dry bed. Reverend Pike made a noise and stuck his hands in the tide. His palms took the stain and kept it, and Ada saw something beautiful and terrible, guilt making itself visible on the one pair of hands, willing to show it. Harlow got the door to breathe again with a practiced jerk. The outside ran in. Smoke pushed. Bell talk continued. Mercy and two boys with wet sacks fanned the flames back from the wall, long enough for Gosen to go in and come out with an armful of tags, tied with string, like a bouquet of cheap prayers. He shoved them at Silas. "Write the names," he said. Silas did. His hand moved with a speed he had not known it had. The names came back to life one by one, under the cover of ash, not resurrected. Recorded. Sometimes that's what the living can do. Harlow saw the tide turning, and did what men of his kind do. When storms teach them they are not the ocean. He tried to make the storm smaller, by naming it. "Everyone stand down," he said. "This is a misunderstanding." It was not. The room told him so with its breath. Ephraim saw his report writing itself without him, and did something stupid the way men do, when their pride senses an end. He reached for Ada's arm, like he had a right to it. Gosen's knife had never left its sheath. It remained there still. His hand did not reach for it. His hand reached for Ephraim's wrist, and held it with a grip that understood bones. Ephraim hissed and tried to smile at the same time. It made him look like a snake learning manners. They all felt it then. The shift no one names but everyone hears. A barn owl landed on the chapel cross in daylight and sat there like a judge tired of court. Those who believed in omens crossed themselves or spat or pretended to laugh. Those who didn't believe in anything at all still felt their skin think about belief. Ada looked up at the bird and did not ask it for anything. She already had what she needed in the room: ink, paper, witness, fire, names, breath. The owl turned its head like a white coin, flipping, and considered the undertaker's bell. The bell kept speaking. Even an owl has ears for some kinds of truth. Harlow's men tried to clear the street. Town bodies did what rivers do when rocks pretend to be dams. They flowed around, over, and through the small authority offered. Reverend Pike, holding his stained hands up, spoke in a voice that faltered, and then found itself. "I altered the register," he said. "I feared a man whose money speaks louder than my sermons. That ends now." He looked at Ada with a grief that asked permission to be useful, and she nodded once, allowing it. Mercy came through the open door. Dower holding a tag up like a warrant. "Unidentified male," she read. "Bullet entry left chest. Date. Wrong on the handbill. Right here." Her voice was a yard of clean linen thrown over a mess. Silas lifted the cuff button and set it beside the tag. The sea caught the light like the old sin in any New Deal. Ephraim had nothing left to say that would not poison him on its way out. He kept his mouth shut and his eyes moving for a door that would still open to him. Captain Harlow took in the pieces and knew his report would not be clean. He had an urge to lock something, anything. He fell back on habit. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, "for your safety I must insist." He never finished the insistence. A crack shot from outside, and the undertaker's shed coughed flame through its roof. Heat slapped the air. Boards fell and turned to teeth. A charred plank flipped up as the roof settled and showed its belly to the day. A brand burned there. The Calder C, clean even under ash. The signature of a man who liked to mark wood as if it were flesh. There was no way to pretend. The letter had wandered there on its own. Mercy looked up at the plank and then at Ephraim with a calm that did not need anger to stand. "You order your boxes with your name on them," she said. What a practical thing. Ada felt the room choose. It is a feeling as old as rooms and people. It is the moment a jury stops being 12 and starts being a verdict. She could almost hear the click as it happened. She could almost see Harlow's shoulders sag a quarter-inch under the weight of a truth that would not make him a promotion. She could almost taste Ephraim's fear like iron in water gone bad. She could almost feel the baby inside her quiet with something like curiosity. The church doors were open now, not because the captain liked it, but because the town made it so. Mercy's bell rope hung slack and steaming like a horse after a ride. The register lay open with the altered line shining like a wound that had started to bleed in the daylight, the way some wounds do when they finally get fresh air. Reverend Pike reached for his quill and dipped it, not in the tipped bottle, but in a spare he kept under the desk, an ink the color of night that had slept and woken honest. He breathed once and wrote the witness names that belonged. The nib scratched. The sound was small and shocking and holy. Gossain watched the doorway, because that is where endings come from, not from paper. He kept his knife sheathed, because that is how you hold a room together, when all it wants to do is fly apart. Nietzsche stood at his side in the space a younger man leaves when he learns he is not a child any longer. Silas copied names, dates, notes, cross-referencing with the speed of a hand taught by fear to be useful. Mercy stacked tags to keep them from running loose and getting lost under boots. The street shifted again. Soldiers pulled back enough to make it look like they had meant to all along. Harlow made his face blank. Ephraim made his face polite. He would try charm next. He could not help it. It was the only tool he had left. "Addie," he said softly, and the softness tried to find old paths through her ear. "You're tired. Come home. Let me set things right. The land is too hot for you in your condition." The word condition made a stink in the air. Ada lifted the ledger page like a small shield. "My condition," she said, "is that I can see." He blinked, not because the words were clever, but because they were true and did not require him to exist in them. Captain Harlow stood straighter. He had found a new thought. If he could not sweep this under, perhaps he could stand on it and pretend it made him taller. "For the peace of the territory," he said, "we will take statements in the chapel. The doors will remain." He looked at the town and changed the word in his mouth. Open. He did not believe in the word. He used it anyway. Men carried buckets. Women brought wet cloths. Boys ran messages with legs that did not know they could tire. Mercy used someone's hat as a cradle for the tags until a proper box could be fetched. Reverend Pike wrote as if every letter might be his last aloud, and in a way it was. Silas drew diagrams men would call crude, and others would call proof. Nietzsche fetched a small jar from a pocket Ada had not imagined a boy like him would carry. He held it out, and she smelled cedar. Gossain took a sliver and fed the ember pouch without looking at his hands, eyes still on doors, on windows, on shadows that might learn to move wrong. Ada squared her shoulders. "I will stand before the church," she said. "I will read this page aloud." Mercy nodded. "Use a table," she advised. The voice carries better when it knows where to put its elbows. They carried a table to the nave and set the ledger and the register on it like bread and salt. People gathered in the pews, in the old habit of gathering, to be told what they already suspected. She started with numbers. She had been told men respected numbers more than any story. She added the missing cattle, named the brand that did not match the sale, pointed at the tithe a small parish could not have needed unless it had learned to eat money for meat. She kept her words short, so they could hop pew to pew. She let pauses do work when words had nothing new to add. She pointed to the register. Reverend Pike held up his stained hands and nodded when she asked him to. He did not try to hide. The room respected that. Even men who did not yet forgive him liked a sinner who could hold his own sin up without shaking. Captain Harlow tried twice to speak and stopped both times because the room preferred to listen to a woman. Ephraim took a step and lost it. He took another and found no purchase. He looked toward the undertaker's shed and the brand on the coffin board. He looked away when he saw two boys tracing the C with their fingers and laughing in a way that had nothing childlike in it. Gossan watched new trouble set its feet under the story. Men on the edge of a room with nothing left to lose are more dangerous than men at the center with everything. He saw one such man, a posse hand whose mouth did not know any shape except a sneer, hitch his belt, and reach for the absence where a gun might have been if the captain had not ordered it left at home. The hand found nothing and made a fist anyway. Nietzsche had a stone in his sling at shoulder height, without the man making it there with his anger. The boy's eyes burned like coals, moved by breath. Ada finished the line about the bribe written as a tithe and let silence rest a second to make room for the truth to sit down. She could feel the cliff under her feet because she was walking toward it, and on purpose. She drew breath to say the next thing, the thing that would turn the crowd into a river with a direction, and the door behind the nave slammed so hard the air jumped. Two soldiers entered with rifles, not raised, but visible. Harlow's face said too late to hide them now. For everyone's order, he said, softer, almost pleading. We will conclude here. Mrs. Rowan will be escorted to a safe room. The rest of you will, he did not say disperse. He looked at their faces and chose a smaller word. Step outside. Ephraim smiled like a man who had remembered he owns a key to a door everyone else has forgotten exists. He laid his palm on the table near Ada's ledger page and leaned in, as if to kiss a cousin's cheek. Trust me, he whispered. She leaned back just enough that his breath missed her face. No, she said. I watched you step over me in the sand. He laughed under his breath. You always were dramatic. A sound rose from outside that was not the bell, and not the fire, and not men's voices. It was the sound a roof makes when it begins to think about not being a roof any longer. The undertaker's shed let go of its last beams and collapsed with a rush that pulled air out of the church in a gasp. Through the front door came a gust of smoke, and with it a charred plank that cartwheeled like a fallen angel. It slapped the church steps and skidded into the aisle. The C on it showed itself proud. The brand cut so deep, even flame could not eat it clean. Mercy bent, picked it up with a cloth, and carried it forward. She set it beside the ledger and the register, and looked at Ephraim, the way a doctor looks at a tumor she is about to cut, without giving it anesthetic. This is yours, she said. Harlow lifted his hands, palms out. Enough, he said. He meant mercy. He meant exhaustion. He meant the end of the rope. He looked like a man who had taken a drink and found blood at the bottom of the cup. Mrs. Rowan, he said, please. Protective. He caught himself before the word could finish disgracing him. Please, he said instead. The chapel doors swung. Soldiers moved. Men in the pews stood up without deciding to. The air grew dense. The owl on the cross turned its head again and looked dead into the church as if counting. Gossan set his palm on the table near the ember pouch and not on the knife. Nietzsche's sling stayed quiet but ready. Silas closed his notebook over the copied names and stood so his body made a small wall that had nothing to do with uniform and everything to do with choice. Mercy folded the cloth over the hot plank and waited for the room to pick a side. Captain Harlow nodded to his two soldiers. They stepped to the doors and with a practiced motion swung them shut. The bolt ran home, with a sound no one mistook for safety. The bolt sat in the wood like a nail in a coffin. Heat pressed in. The fire outside breathed at the seams. Harlow's jaw worked as if he could chew a better choice out of stubborn air. Ephraim smoothed his coat and put on the face he used for funerals. He did not pay for. Ada set a hand to the ledger page and to her belly together, steadying both. Gosen's eyes held the room like a rope around a skittish horse. Nietzsche shifted his weight and made himself a hinge the door would have to answer to. Silas slid the cuff button and the Undertaker tags into his pocket and let his fingers rest on the Bible, a heartbeat longer than habit. The first crash came from the side window. Boys with wet cloths and a plank drove the casement inward. Smoke poured like a creature finally given permission to enter. Mercy's voice cut through it, harsh and merciful both. "Out now," she called, "or choke on your own caution." Two men pushed for the door and found it would not bless them. Their shoulders hit wood and stayed. Gosen stepped to the window and threw his weight low against the sill. "Go," he said to Ada. She shook her head once. "No." He looked at her and understood. He took the plank from Mercy and wedged it to make the opening larger. The glass gave with a sound like a cry in a cold room. Harlow turned to the soldiers. "Unbolt," he ordered, softer than command, more like a wish. One soldier obeyed the tone rather than the word. The other stared at Ephraim. Ephraim stared back and let fear run like sugar through his smile. He whispered, "Hold," and the man held because habit is a leash you make and then forget how to chew through. The window became the only throat. People began to pass through it one by one, with a grace panic sometimes gives the living. Silas took the register and the ledger page and handed them down like children at a barn raising. Mercy took the hot coffin plank and set it on cool stone. Reverend Pike climbed next, robes black with smoke at the hem, hands black with ink in the palm. He landed and did not fall. The town made a lane for him without saying why. Ada waited, because leaving first is a good way to have a door shut behind you forever. She waited until the room had fewer strangers in it and more air. Then she climbed, with Gosen's palm under her foot, a pressure sure enough to count as a blessing. Nietzsche came last, through the window, and flicked his sling against the bolt. The leather loop found the iron tongue. The bolt jumped back and out. The doors opened because they had been asked twice by the same truth. Harlow and his pair stepped aside into a life that would be smaller tomorrow. Street sound swallowed church sound. Smoke hugged people and let them go again. Ephraim walked out like a man finishing a service he planned, his hat still clean, his boots still suggesting a future where boots like his will always remain clean. He tipped the brim to Ada, as if tipping years off her story. "Come now," he said, gentle poison. "Enough theater." Gosen stepped between them. He did not touch Ephraim. He touched air. It obeyed. A hiss went through the crowd, as if a snake had finally introduced itself. The Undertaker's shed caved into its own fire with a sigh. The brand on the fallen plank steamed. Mercy looked at it, and then at the open church, and then at the sky. "You can burn a body," she said, voice for everyone, "but you cannot burn the truth that a mark leaves behind." Ephraim smiled at her, like a man who remembers a woman's first name only after she has delivered his child. "Doctor," he said, "you have done enough." Ada lifted the ledger page to her chin and drew breath to speak. Harlow raised a hand to stop her, and saw himself doing it. He let the hand fall. He said, "Not to her, not to anyone." Statements this afternoon. The sentence had lost its spine. He looked at the hills as if a cleaner valley might be available by walking. The hills looked back with their old unblinking. A whistle came from the wash. Not a bird. Kin. Nietzsche answered with two notes that made a soldier glance at his boot to see if a snake had adopted him. Gosen nodded. "Now," he said to Ada, as if now were a bridge and not a moment. She understood. The town was awake, but the town could be put to sleep again by paper and men who loved paper. The story needed a place the town could not swallow. "Where?" she asked. He tipped his chin toward the black-toothed hills, where the wind etched old names into stone. "Red Wash," he said. Silas caught the word and made his decision mid-step. "I'm coming," he said. Mercy tightened her jaw. Me too. Reverend Pike looked at his inked hands, and then at the vestry key that would never clean itself, and followed like a man who has run out of rooms to hide in. They left by alleys that remembered other flights. The posse saw and tried to circle, but the posse had to stay near the captain's orders, or risk the kind of loneliness even braver men do not like. Harlow watched and chose not to see. Ephraim watched and saw too much. He raised his hand and two of his own peeled away like dogs taught a whistle. They would ride to cut off in the hills. He would arrive last and pretend surprise. He told his face the shape to take when feigned relief became useful again. The land narrowed its eyes at them as they walked. Ada felt it and did not apologize. She had stood on its throat yesterday, and it had not killed her. Today she asked it for one more loan. She took each step like a sentence she meant. The child shifted, patient. Mercy paced beside her with a bag that clinked. Silas's boot heels spoke to rocks. Reverend Pike's breath found a rhythm a psalm might approve. Nietzsche ran as if carrying light. Gosain led like a man who trusts the ground because he has earned the ground's trust. The hills opened their mouth. The red wash was not red today, only sullen. When the sky darkened, it took on old stains. Bones lived shallow here. You did not trip on them if you knew how to look. Ada did not trip. She saw with her feet now, as well as her eyes. They walked down into the old bowl, where voices return to you, so you cannot pretend you did not hear yourself. Gosen set his hand to the air, reading it as he read sand. His face eased. Here, he said, truth sits here and does not slip. Silas set the undertaker tags on a flat rock like thin stones from a quiet river. Mercy drew out twine and retied knots the fire had tried to teach to forget. Reverend Pike set the parish register open where the sun could dry his fresh line without shame. Ada set the ledger page beside it. The 4 papers looked like a family reunion, where no one had planned for how many would come. Nietzsche climbed the south lip and lay with his chin on his wrist, eyes on the approach from town. He did not blink much. He had taught himself not to, when the lesson had teeth. The first of Ephraim's men appeared as a taste of dust, and then a shape. They reined in at the rim and tried to look like men who had not intended to take a woman back by rope. Captain Harlow followed slower, cavalry trotting neat as a parade ruined by a drunk. Ephraim last, smiling at the staging as if he had rented the theater. He took in the papers on the rock and looked pained, as if clutter offended him. Addie, he said, too smooth. Not out here. He nodded at the ground the way a man nods at a stain. It's indecent. Ada raised the ledger page. Her voice carried because the bowl liked brave sounds. I will read, she said. Harlow opened his mouth. She did not stop. Numbers first. Missing head of cattle. Sale to no brand. Tithe the size of a bribe. She pointed to the register and Pike raised his stained hands again and said for the second time that day, I altered it. I make it right now. Silas lifted a tag and read, unidentified male, bullet left chest. He picked up the cuff button and let it glint. The bowl threw the glint back at Ephraim's eyes. He squinted. He did not blink. Ephraim kept his horse moving a half step, a rich man's tick, as if motion were a perfume he could wear. Stories, he said softly, hauling silk over wire. A grief-struck widow, a parson with a conscience late by a week, a doctor who sees ghosts in wax, a deputy who wants a name, gentleman captain. Do we let the desert decide law now? He smiled at Gosain without moving his mouth. His hand drifted toward his coat. Harlow saw the drift. Don't, he said to the coat, not to the man. Ephraim's hand stilled. His eyes did not. They moved to Silas's gun, to Mercy's bag, to Nietzsche's ridge, to the angle of Gosain's hips and shoulders, where a tracker keeps balance even when standing still. Wind came up the wash and lifted Ada's hair. She did not flinch when grit found the raw rope marks on her wrists under the cloth. She felt the old fear paw the door. She did not open. You cast me out to die beyond the county line, she said flat to Ephraim, so the bowl could carry the shape of the sentence. You told men to laugh when they circled. You cut my water and counted your cattle and wrapped God's name around theft. Ephraim put a hand to his heart and looked wounded with an artistry that would have made him rich in any city. "Addy," he said. "Careful." Gosen moved his weight, a leaf's worth, and the wash understood. He did not reach for the knife. His palm brushed the ember pouch. He said to the air more than to any man. An oath, then. He looked at Ada. He spoke so everyone would hear, and none could break it later by saying it had not been said. "Whom they cast out, I do not deliver to death on my trail. I give fire, shelter, and the use of my eyes. If a bullet comes for her breath, it will pass through mine first." He did not look away from the man on the gelding when he said, "breath." Ephraim smiled as if the word amused him. Captain Harlow tried to change endings with a gesture. He lifted a hand, palm out. "Enough," he said, for the 10th time that hour. "Lower weapons. We will—" He did not get to the verb. Ephraim finished a thought he had started 3 days ago in a room with good curtains. He drew and fired in one clean arc built from years of practice and months of fear. The sound cracked off the bowl and flew around looking for someone to bite. Gosen stepped left and into the bullet. It hit him high, the meat of his shoulder, and a kiss for the bone. He went down to one knee and back up, because the ground had not taken a full payment. Nietzsche's sling sang once. A stone snapped Ephraim's hat brim and bit the skin under his hairline. Blood showed thin, a line above the eye. Men always think their own blood is a bigger thing than anyone else's. Silas fired for the first time all day and hit what he aimed at, Harlow's pistol hand. The captain's gun jumped like an insult and went clattering down the rock. The soldiers flinched, not from pain, but from surprise, at the sight of their captain learning anything the hard way. Mercy was already moving like water poured downhill. She hit Gosen's side with both hands and dragged him toward a rock as if he weighed nothing, which is what men weigh when a woman who has lifted life in her hands decides not to let them drop. Ada stood. The sound of the shot had emptied the world, but the world refilled fast with breath and the bell of her own heart. She lifted the ledger page again and the register and spoke into the ring left by fear. "Numbers," she said, calm. "Names, marks, dates, truth." She pointed at Ephraim. "Thief." She pointed at the plank. "Your C on a coffin meant for me." She pointed at Harlow. "Complicity." The air did something strange. It listened. Ephraim lunged. He had been taught that the body wins where the tongue fails. He crossed 3 yards in 2 strides and made his hand into a hook. Ada did not run. She set one foot half behind the other and made herself a door whose hinge would not break. Gosen rose into the lunge with a sound that was not a word and not a growl, and met the hook with his blood-wet arm. The hook found muscle already open. Pain moved through him and left. He stayed. Nietzsche's arrow was on the string without her asking. It went out and in and through. It did not kill. It found Ephraim's collarbone with the delicate malice of a needle finding a nerve. He screamed like a small god, denied worship. Soldiers chose. You could see them do it. The ones who had learned to love orders more than sleep reached for rifles. The ones who had learned to love sleep more than promotion stepped back and made their bodies thin so truth could pass. Harlow held his bleeding hand and kept his mouth shut for once. Mercy packed Gosen's wound with a strip of linen soaked in something that smelled like a forest floor after rain and pressed. "Stay," she said, harsh. "Not for you, for her." Gosen touched 2 fingers to the dirt and then to Ada's wrist where the rope had burned her. "Fire," he murmured, because vows need verbs. "Shelter." He pulled the ember pouch free and put it in her palm. It was warm like a small animal that likes you. "Keep it," he said. The wash winced and kept watching. Ephraim tried another lunge with the other arm, the one without an arrow in it. Silas met him with the weight of a man who had finally decided who he was. He did not throw a punch. He set his shoulder and let Ephraim hit it. Ephraim bounced off as if a wall had been placed there by an honest carpenter. He went down on one knee, in dust turned pink. The color suited him too well. He groped for the fallen pistol with a hand that had never had to grope for anything. Nietzsche's second stone cracked the knuckles, and the pistol jumped away like a frog from a boy's hand. Ada stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. "Witness," she said. to the ring of people in uniforms, and in aprons, and in Sunday black, to Mercy and Silas and Pike, to Gosain, bleeding and standing, and to Nietzsche, breathing like a bowstring. You see him, you see the books, you see the mark, you see the men who locked a church, you see the fire, and who it tried to serve. I was cast out to die. I did not die. I was given fire, shelter, and an oath. I claim them. She looked at Harlow and gave him something he had not had all day, a place to put his shame. Captain, she said, and it sounded less like an insult than a summons. Right this right. Harlow nodded once because a better man inside him took the wheel for a turn. He looked at Silas and spoke the only honest order left to him. Take statements, he said. Open doors. He turned to Ephraim, who had found his feet and his smile, and neither worked. You, Harlow said, old authority returning not as pride, but as bone. Dismount. Ephraim tried a laugh. It broke on a tooth he had not known was loose. He dismounted. The wash held still long enough to let three things happen in one breath. Mercy bound Gosain tight and tied the knot with a skill that had saved more men than names remember. Silas put shackles on Ephraim that clicked as neatly as sums done right. Reverend Pike wrote a single sentence across the bottom of the register page in a hand steadier than any he had written that year, witnessed and corrected in open air. Red wash, with God and the people, and the dead, as witness. He signed his name under it and did not blot. Wind rolled through like an invisible horse, changing leads. The owl from the chapel came and set itself on a snag near the rim, a white comma on old wood. Nobody asked it why. It simply was. The sun thought about setting. The light went pewter again. Bells in town began to ring, not because a hand pulled them, but because heat leaves iron like a breath leaving a chest. 3 slow strikes walked the valley. 1, 2, 3. The sound was old and young. It lived in bone. Gosain swayed. Mercy's hand on his chest kept him in the world. Ada knelt because her knees had heard the bell and chose to answer. She pressed the ember pouch to her heart and then to the ground. She lit a sliver of cedar from it and made a tiny fire in the wash's dust. The flame took and held like a hand gripping back. She said nothing to it. She did not need to. Gosain watched the flame, and the line of his mouth eased, as if something in him had found its place. They walked back in a slow column as the wash let them go. Soldiers carried the shed's plank. Silas carried the register and the tags. Mercy carried the bag and the blood on her hands like vulcanized truth. Reverend Pike carried the key he would never again use to lock a book against a woman. Nietzsche carried a silence that was not anger and not peace, and both. Gosain walked with his shoulder burning and his feet sure. Ada walked with a child riding low and patient and a pouch of fire at her belt. In town, doors opened because they had to. Harlow did not order it. He simply stopped standing in the way. Statements were taken at pews with pencils borrowed from children. Mercy laid the tags out on the altar stone and did not apologize. Reverend Pike set the register open and did not guard it. Silas wrote until his hand cramped and then wrote with the other. Nietzsche sat on a sill and taught 2 boys to twist sling leather. And when they asked if you used it on people, he said, only when the people forget they are people. As stars found their places one by one, Mercy lit a lamp and then another. Ada stood in the nave and watched the light make small crowns on ordinary heads. Ephraim sat with his hands bound and his eyes busy with plans that would never live long enough to be named. Captain Harlow stood at the doorway and took the first quiet breath he had taken since sunrise. He did not smile. He did not deserve to. He did nod to Ada in a way that did not demand anything from her in return. Before midnight, Reverend Pike closed the register and set his palms on it. Ink pooled black in the creases. He lifted his hands and the prints stayed, a man's guilt made honest on paper. Mercy carried a basin to Ada, and Ada washed her wrists and watched the water turn thin brown, and then clear. A lesson written in a small bowl. Silas brought her the cuff button and said, "For your page." She shook her head. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it when you tell this again." Gosain stood in the doorway as if to measure the night. The bandage had bled through, and then settled. He looked at Ada, and then at the ember pouch, where it hung, at her belt. He tipped his chin at it, a question that did not require words. She answered by placing her palm over it. "I'll keep it," she said. "I'll make the fire when it's time." He nodded. He said one more word, because vows like to hear themselves closed. "Oath." She smiled with only her eyes, because her mouth had forgotten for a while how. "Kept," she said. At dawn the next day, a wind moved a bell rope that no hand held. The bell tolled 3 times and stopped. The sound walked through houses and around horses, and into the undertaker's room, where wax cooled and truth sat on tags like frost. It walked out to the overhang of basalt, where Ada had left her ring. She found it later and did not put it back on. She placed it beside the ember scars instead, a small circle of metal near a small circle of ash. The desert took both without hurry. Years after, the Hollis ledger from that summer would smell faintly of smoke when you turned to the page with 3 wax marks. The sheriff's deposition in Silas Boone's file would show one name scratched out with 3 hard strokes, and, in the margin, the same name written again in a steadier hand. If you ever handle either, you will feel heat rise through the paper as if a coal still lived under it. If the books speak again, you'll know which page to open first. The tags Mercy saved outlived the men who ordered them burned. If you believe records can still speak, subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're hearing this oath.